Okay, so talking about color and using it in a way that produces this feeling of objects being close to you or far from you, you can utilize these this hue saturation values. So here in processing, if I go to my tools and choose my color selector, um, again, as you are pulling color out, making something more closer to white, a saturation value of a small saturation value is going to pull the color out and have less color added to it. And then you can add saturation by pulling it closer to 100. So I choose a color, a hue. My hue value is 198, but I can pull out saturation, color saturation, and put into it. An application of this is, let's say you want something to be pushed off into the distance with atmospheric perspective. A nice example of atmospheric perspective is this here, where you have objects that are close to you are very dark, and objects that are very far from you are very faint, more closely associated with the sky color. So as they get farther from you, they look like they're going off into the distance. Okay? Taking that idea is I've defined colors based on this. I've got a sky color, which is this value here. If I use my color picker, I have a color of 198, and I have a hue or a saturation value of 68 and a brightness value of 99. So if I typed in 68 and 99, I get a, if I enter that, doesn't want to update for me. And so I get something like this for my sky. Now I've made variables to hold that information. I've called one my sky, so I have a sky color defined. Now anything that's closer than the sky is going to get subtly more saturated until I get the objects that are really close to me. So you have the sky in the background and then objects getting closer and closer and closer to the camera, like in that image of the mountains. Farther away. And so I'm taking that very simple idea. I've got my farthest object that's going to be closer to the sky color, and then my objects close to the camera in the midground. So when I run this, you can see I have my sky color. The objects that are close to the camera are going to be a darker, more bright, have a higher have brightness values closer that make them darker. Closer to 0 makes them darker. My midground and my foreground is going to be closer to the sky. So if I have my sky attributes, I have my hue. Notice that the hue value is the same, 198, 198, 198. Notice that the saturation values are changing, 82, 81. The lower the saturation value, the more close to black it is. So the object that is closest to me, the saturation value, the closer to 0, is more white. So this is going to be more white or less colored than this one or this one or this one. So the one that's farthest is actually the sky. Then I have an object, an ellipse, that is slightly more saturated. Then my midground is still more saturated. But I change the brightness factor. So I have hue, the color stays the same, but my saturation values change a lot, and my brightness values change. So I'm just trying to get that sense of something being pushed off into the distance. So making a composition with this, you see this kind of thing all the time. If you look at different, if you search things like color in atmospheric perspective. you come up with a lot of examples. Another really cool example of this is if I look up atmospheric perspective, I go to my Google Images, and I bring that tab over here. Some cool, a lot of examples, a lot of these mountain ranges, same kind of thing here. You can see the same thing in cityscapes. The darker, more closer to the sky in the background, the darker, more saturated things up front. If you want to represent that in a painting, here it is, someone painting something. More distant, less saturated, more saturated and bright, the brightness is darker. So these feel largely, they feel close to us, and these things in the distance feel far away. And so keeping that in mind really gives you a sense of closeness and depth. These buildings feel farther, these buildings feel closer. Even this giant monster is right in the middle someplace. So just that's the basic idea. Another example, these buildings in the back are closer to the sky. These objects up front are darker and much more saturated. So you can do your own search on that and look at these things and start to utilize those things in your own work just to create that illusion of depth. All right? So when you're working with your projects, that's what I want you to be thinking about. Not just the color families, but then if you're making landscapes or something, get us a feeling of depth by utilizing colors that way. Overlapping objects gives you depth, color values give you depth, perspective gives you depth. And so those kind of things are all really interesting and things I want you to experiment with in your projects for your color study and your color principles of design. All right, I want you to have fun and I want you to explore these ideas.